Hey guys, welcome back to the lounge. Let's address the elephant in the room here. I did not get my hair cut like I said I would, because I got lazy, but at least I'm not wearing a toque today, so baby steps. As I'm sure basically all of you guys are aware, Xbox just bought Activision Blizzard, a fact that I can't get away from because my brother keeps making the same joke that the sequel to Crash 4, It's About Time, is gonna be Crash 5, It's About Money, by acquisition. Somebody please tell him that that joke is not funny. I've been trying to, and he's just not listening to me. Okay, it's kind of funny. If you wanted my quick 1 to 2 minute thoughts on this situation, I could go on about this forever, but ultimately I think that it's either going to be a really good thing or a really bad thing. It's one of the extremes. We don't know what it is yet. Personally, for me, it's kind of perfect because I have a PlayStation and I have an Xbox with Game Pass, so I'm just getting more value, but I understand that I'm in a very fortunate situation here. To the wider industry, there's a lot more of a broad spectrum of ramifications that could show up here. Ideally, this opens the door to Sony maybe, perhaps allowing Game Pass on PlayStation. That's kind of the utopian outcome. Alternatively, hopefully Xbox is more interested in raking in the money from COD as a multi-platform franchise rather than having it exclusive. Luckily, most of the Blizzard community skews PC as well, so that one's not as big of a blow. We really don't know what's happening. This could be a really good thing for the industry, but at the same time, it does kind of leave a sour taste in my mouth. I've seen some people have this sentiment that, hey, everyone was saying that there's no reason to buy Xbox before because of how good the PlayStation exclusives were, and now there is a reason to buy Xbox, and you're all getting butthurt about it. I mean, it seems kind of hypocritical, doesn't it? But in fairness, I do think that it's reasonable for PlayStation fans to be upset since, first of all, most of Sony's acquisitions or big hitters are homegrown or were pretty indoctrinated into the PlayStation community regardless. Insomniac, Bluepoint, Housemarque, they started up some new studios as well. So it felt less like something was being taken away and more like they were building things organically. And second, Xbox has acquired a ton of studios over the years, not just old acquisitions that they underutilized like Rareware, but recently they got Ninja Theory, Double Fine, and Obsidian among others. And then of course they bought all of Bethesda, meaning directly developed Bethesda games, id Software, Arcane, Machine Games, etc., which already felt like they were snatching an established third-party player away from PlayStation, and then now they did it again with an even bigger piece. Look, corporations are corporations, it's all fair game in the end, and I'm not saying this as a crying Sony fan. Like I said, it all works out for me. This is actually perfect for me, but I do understand why PlayStation fans would be upset. While we may not know what the future holds with this acquisition, what we can say is that the entire industry has been shaken up by this news, and Sony might need to press on the gas a little bit harder to keep up. We've already been told that Sony studios are working on an even higher quantity of games than they ever have before, and a lot of their big players are working on multiple projects at once, but it's always nice to talk about some old IPs that could come back and help bolster their lineup even more, and I feel like this is the best time to do that considering everything that's going on. There will always be new IPs that pop up out of nowhere and absolutely crush it immediately, and I love seeing that, but there's also a lot of dormant franchises that I think deserve a lot of love again. And just by the way, I won't be including the Infamous franchise in this video because I already have a whole dedicated video as to why I want that franchise back, so if you want my thoughts on that, you can go watch that. But other than that, let's get into the first game, which is Socom. Now, I've actually never played Socom since, well, I was 2 when the original game came out and the franchise ran out of steam quickly after, but this is probably the series that I see most often mentioned when the topic of reviving older franchises comes up. Considering that no matter what, Sony will most likely be making a lot less money off of COD now, this might be the first time reviving this series seems like a viable idea. Sony is severely lacking in first-person shooters now after Bethesda, Blizzard, and Activision all migrated to Microsoft, and while their new studio Firesprite is working on a new multiplayer shooter among many other things, Sony really needs more than one of these in their corner. They actually had a bunch back in the 2000s before Uncharted and Infamous really spurred on that narrative third-person action-adventure wave that the company's still on, and I think they need to find a better balance between these two incredibly popular genres. Socom still has some name recognition and fan passion, and it fits well as a foil to Call of Duty. They fall into similar categories. I highly doubt you'll ever be able to go toe-to-toe with that franchise, but you'll at least be able to pick up a bit of the market share slack that's been introduced to your side of things. Similarly, these next 2 picks are also first-person shooters, though this is less for their multiplayer, though that is helpful, and more for their single-player campaigns, and that is Killzone and Resistance. Like I said, the Bethesda acquisition from last year is just just as important here. It took away games like Doom and Wolfenstein, so you need a good lineup of single-player shooters as well. Xbox has so many at this point. And in my opinion, both of these series have a lot more to offer. Guerrilla Games is a whole new class of developer since starting Horizon, so having them work on Killzone again might lead to a less shallow experience than it was previously. And while I think Insomniac really has their hands full with projects right now, Resistance is a game that feels far enough removed from them that it can be worked on by any other studio and still feel legit as long as it's done well. That new San Diego studio that we still haven't gotten many updates from is apparently working on an existing franchise, and I really hope it's this one because I love the Resistance games, and I also feel like they would work really well in this new age of super active shooters. Maybe one of the things that feels the most wrong about this acquisition, like it just leaves a weird feeling in my stomach, is that Xbox now owns the exclusive rights to Crash Bandicoot. That doesn't seem like it should happen, you know? Imagine if PlayStation had the exclusive rights to Halo. That just feels weird. Although mascot platformers aren't nearly as popular nowadays as they were before, the revitalizations of both Spyro and Crash did really well when they came out, and Nintendo has shown that if you can make these games great, they can still generate a lot of revenue. The audience that they reach is maybe the broadest audience in all of gaming. People in their 50s and people under 10 years old can both have a great time with a mascot platformer. Jak and Daxter is one that's brought up a lot by fans, and I think it absolutely deserves a chance to shine in the modern day, whether it's a remake or a full new game. And honestly, either way, I'd say give it to Bluepoint. It would be cool to see what they can make from scratch. But another franchise that I'd love to see show up again is Sly Cooper. It fits the more all-ages platformer model a bit better than Jak, which really became more of an action-adventure game than anything, and it's got a great art style and a somewhat unique take on a popular genre. A stealth platformer is something that you don't see very often. Sly Cooper was never the most popular franchise in its genre, but with the right team and the right marketing, who knows what it could do. Sony recently heavily expanded Team Asobi and put a lot of their eggs into that basket, and if they make more than just the Astrobot games and become Sony's go-to studio for platforming, I honestly think they'd make a killer game in this franchise if Sucker Punch is too busy doing other things. Another game that I'm not too familiar with, but it has a crazy amount of fanfare, is Legend of Dragoon, and recently there have been rumblings of this game coming back in some capacity. Sony is apparently ready to share a big new first-party exclusive as well as a new third-party exclusive, and fans are theorizing that they might just be Legend of Dragoon and Chrono Trigger remakes. Bethesda takes with it some of the most iconic Western RPG franchises of all time, and while these games aren't direct matches with those, maybe Sony just needs to double down on the JRPGs they have at the moment and offer a list of games for a massive fan base which can only be found on their platform. Sony already has a really great relationship with Square Enix, having that Final Fantasy exclusivity, and if they can add these games along with Persona and FF16, that corners off the market pretty effectively. Speaking of that rumor, there's been another game that's been floating around in that sphere, and I've heard a lot about this, and I doubt a lot about this, but I did want to bring it up because I think the idea of this thing existing in the future isn't impossible. Veil, which is a Bloodborne successor. Now you might be thinking Bloodborne doesn't count because it's not exactly a franchise that needs to be revived, but at the same time it's been 7 years since this game came out, there's been no shred of official announcements that this will continue, and a lot of other franchises that are considered dead had their latest entries come out pretty close to 2015 when this game released, so I'd say it's fair game. From Software is on an absolute tear right now. They're maybe the single most hyped up third-party dev out there, and having played the Elden Ring network test and feeling how good that game feels, I'm pretty confident that the reputation is just going to increase with this game. So if Sony could solidify their exclusive relationship with them, with Demon's Souls, Bloodborne, and now a potential third exclusive, once again, it doesn't match anything that Xbox is doing, but it does give them their own little block of land that they could work with and appeal to a passionate audience. I'll be completely real, this next game, it has no reasoning as to why it would actually work right now compared to any other time, but I just want to see this creative franchise return. Gravity Rush is just so unique, and maybe it's that very thing that made it not a massive commercial success. But I think seeing the love around a game like Returnal means that people are a bit more comfortable with weirder stuff in the mainstream, so Gravity Rush might have a better shot at capturing a larger audience if it released a new game today. As for the next game, I feel like there's an opening right now for a new, popular GTA-like title that can actually make a splash now that we know how big the gap can be between GTA games. Saints Row used to have that side action pretty well until it went too crazy, Mafia couldn't capture the magic of the gameplay, Watch Dogs gave it its best shot but it fell short, Cyberpunk wasn't a direct competitor with it, but in some ways it also kinda was, and it didn't have the impact it wanted. So all in all, looking at all of that, the door feels wide open now. There's a new Saints Row coming out, sure, but I don't think it looks like it's doing enough to capture people's attention, which is why I think it might be the time to bring back the Getaway. It's got that more foreign setting, so it has a fancier feel. It's in the same group of games as GTA, but it has enough differences directly on the surface for it to not need to 100% directly compete with it like some of these other games. And frankly, I just think it's a good way for Sony to diversify what they're doing while also not straying too far from the formula that's worked so well for them. And speaking of that exact thing, the last game on this list, and also the one that I feel like is most in line with Sony's current focus rather than being a reaction to the acquisition and making up for that, is The Order. While the developers of The Order 1886 are now owned by Facebook and are doing VR stuff, Sony does own this IP, and I honestly think this franchise deserves a second wind as much as, or even more than, most of the games I mentioned. The foundation here, with the game being an absolutely insane graphical showcase that still more than holds up today, mixed with a really interesting premise for a world and a great time period for a narrative-driven shooter, is incredible. A lot of people have gone back to this game, and especially removed from its original price tag, discovered that there's a lot of great game here despite it being panned by critics on release. There's some rough edges for sure, but I genuinely think this franchise has some of the most promise lying under the surface out of every currently dormant Sony IP, and I'd love to see that promise be followed through on. I'm curious what you guys might want to see back. I know some people have mentioned Siphon Filter and Heavenly Sword, that would be cool too. As for an actual full-on acquisition that Sony could make in light of all of this, I think the only one that makes sense is Konami, and that's the only one that I'd be okay with. They're also a company that has a very tight relationship with Sony. A lot of their games were exclusive for them, and on top of that, Konami's just not doing anything with their franchises right now, so I feel like if Sony bought them and did something with it, it's an all-win, no-lose situation, because if Sony doesn't buy them, we're not getting these games anyways. So other than that, what are the franchises that you want to see back? Subscribe if you're new here, like the video if you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.